Hello.
Hi.
So good to see you. I think
Great
this
to
is our
see you.
first time meeting.
I think formally. Yeah.
So I appreciate you coming on and talking to us. I feel like I've had a lot of people on the show, but I don't know if I've had anyone on the show who's had such like a multifaceted relationship with politics as you. So I should probably tell the listeners who we're talking to, 'cause sometimes I wait, but I think it's important to say. So today we have a very special guest. We have Liz Brown on the show. She's the executive director of YWCA. We're really excited to have you on today.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be having this conversation with you.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. I mean, I know all of our kids are in CCS, so they're off school.
They are
today.
off school.
So we are like, those days are like always crazy for
They're
me.
always
Because I got to
crazy.
figure out what I'm gonna do.
It's a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, but we make it work. So we're both here.
Like women do
as,
every day.
Right,
We
we're
make
both
it work.
here as moms. We're both here as career women. We're both here as people who care about our communities.
Yes.
But what I was saying is, I feel like you might be one of the people like at the top that I've ever had on the show who has such a multifaceted relationship with politics. You yourself have been in politics because you were on city council for a number of years.
Yep.
On Columbus City Council. And then your dad is Sherrod Brown.
Yeah.
So now you are the executive director at YWCA. Can you talk a little bit about like that journey and why you decided that YWCA was where you wanted to be at this point in time?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the core mission of YWCA, I mean, our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. I'm wearing an orange sweatshirt because that's our color, and it says power on it because we're all about empowering people. That's how YWCA works. And for me, I've always had this interest, partly growing up with my dad. I've really always had an interest in policy and government because I think it can change people's lives. I think it can be a force for good. My dad has shown me that just as a kid. This whole idea that there was a cynical view of politics was really foreign to me because I saw him relating to people, being the same person at the dinner table as he was on TV. And I really, again, believed in that force for good. So as I became an adult and embarking on my own career, I was interested in policy work, and that's ultimately what brought me to running for Columbus City Council, where I served for 7 years and then found that if I really wanted to go deep in the issues that inspire me, which is social justice, women's rights, all of that, that it was time to make a move into the nonprofit space where we are fierce advocates. YWCA is set apart from any organization because we're human services, right? We're on the front lines. We run homeless shelters. We have 23 childcare sites across the county. We do leadership development and racial equity education. So it's our frontline service. But we also advocate. Like we are in the streets, raising our voices for a better future so that the services we provide don't have to exist.
Yeah.
Our national leader who runs YWCA USA put it perfectly when I heard her speak in person for the first time. She said, we were headed out actually to advocate in Congress to our federal officials about what YWCA's needed. And she said, now remember, when you go into these spaces, we are nonpartisan. We are 501c3.
Right.
But we are never neutral. There's no space for neutrality in the movement because we are pushing for better outcomes, which can sometimes sound radical. And just because we're nonpartisan should not mean that we are ever neutral.
Yeah. And that really resonates with me because I worked at a state organization for a while, and I had to stop because I felt like I couldn't advocate as strongly as I wanted to about certain things. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna have to go into the nonprofit space where this is not every single nonprofit, but in general, whatever your nonprofit is about, like everyone who works there believes in that thing. Otherwise they wouldn't be there. And so for me, that really resonates with what you're saying. It's like being able to go a little bit deeper than maybe, I mean, obviously when you're on council, you've got like a million things, no matter what committee you're on, which is, you know, a subject matter, and you're that subject matter expert who's on that committee, you still can't go as deep because there's a gazillion people in Columbus.
You are like exactly putting it in the same way that I thought of it at that when I was able to make that transition. That's exactly right. One thing that's beautiful about elected office is you get to be a generalist, but one thing that's hard about elected office is that you have to be a generalist, right? So this opportunity to go deep on empowering women and eliminating racism is a dream.
Yeah, well, I'm happy for you because I've definitely been there, and there's nothing like working in a place where you feel like you're really making an impact every day. So YWCA, you're running YWCA. We know that many of the folks who you are serving at YWCA are marginalized in one way or the other. You all had an event a few weeks ago, Activists and Agitators, which you've been doing for a couple of years now. But this year, because we're on the precipice of an election, you're focusing on the election. And one of the things that you all were saying, you know, as you were embarking on that program was equity means access for all, but that's just not the case for everyone. I know what you mean by that. Can you talk a little bit to my listeners about when you say that equity means access for all, but that's not the case, how that relates to voting and what you all are doing to try to educate people and to change that?
Yeah, so we talked a lot that night about voting rights, really big picture voting rights issues, and really looked at the history of our nation. And then we also got really detailed about our present. So we did something interactive with the audience in the beginning of the night where they were able to like check their voter registration, make sure, you know, everything was matched so they could update it if they needed to.
Which was great because people have been kicked off the rolls.
That's right. Bingo. And that's some of the stuff that's happening presently. That's really about excluding people from the ballot. And look, as a nation, we have excluded people from the ballot before. I mean, when we were founded as a nation, it was like a couple dozen white male property owners who were like, people like us should get access to the ballot. Right. And folks of color are 3/5 of a human. So we've been there. And I do think that when Martin Luther King talked about the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice, he knew that it was an uneven line, right? But we bend it. And it is an uneven line. But largely, we've been trying to make progress on this voting issue from the literacy tests of the Jim Crow era, where we said, you know, Black Americans could have the right to vote, but we put them to a quote test. We have these federal laws that we're supposed to push back on that, safeguard communities from being subjected to tests like that. And then we had the Supreme Court decision just about a decade ago that actually struck down the need for states to safeguard marginalized populations in their access to the ballot, right? And so I'm having trouble seeing the arc bend towards justice when it comes to voting. And I think we got to do something about it, right? Like I
didn't expect to get like, I don't know if I'm just pissed or what, but like all the work that's been done and then to see the work being pushed back just makes me really upset because it's like we've done generations of work. You mentioned the test during Jim Crow. Like my grandparents had to go through that. And then they're in their 80s now. And for them to see people's voting rights being taken away, you know, Frank LaRose making it so that, you know, there's one place that people can submit their ballot. It's just so dishonest.
It's so dishonest. And they cloak it in different things. So they're not going to do a literacy test because that makes us think of Jim Crow. But what they do is force voter ID laws, which do disenfranchise marginalized people. So the people that we serve, many of them former victims of domestic violence, many of them have lost their homes, right? They're homeless. That's why they're in our shelters. Right. And those, when you're fleeing from an intimate partner violence situation, you are not thinking about your documents, you're thinking about your life. Right. And so we're essentially punishing folks in that circumstance. And I believe when we're thinking about voting, we shouldn't think about oh, what's the average of what the majority has available to them to be able to use? No, we should be thinking about sort of the hardest to access. How do we make sure everyone has that right and tailor our laws to that? And that is not what happens now.
No.
So we think the folks we serve have so much on the line, and that's why we can't do anything but speak out on these issues. And it's why our event was so focused on that. And I appreciate you bringing voice to the issue on your show, because we need everyone to know that they have to bring their ID to vote. That there are IDs that you can get from the state for free to bring to vote. And if you can't access your own ID, to please go try to get one from the state, knowing that the hurdles shouldn't be there. Like, this should not be what we have to confront this year, but it is. And the only way we dig ourselves out of this hole is to show up, use our voice, show out, really, and make sure we pass the anti-gerrymandering amendment, Issue One.
Yeah. You mentioned people being able to access free IDs. How do people do that?
So it's through the state of Ohio.
Okay.
And it is particular for, they added it as a sort of an out when they knew that these traditional voter ID laws are so restrictive.
Right.
And so you have to, unfortunately, still bring documentation to prove your ID. So it is a no-win situation for many folks.
There's still barriers for people who are in situations where, bringing any type of documentation would be difficult.
That's right.
That's what we're fighting against right now. And you mentioned the anti-gerrymandering bill, which we're asking people to vote yes on Issue One. Can you talk a little bit about that and connect it back to your own work for people?
Yeah, so Issue One will establish a completely nonpartisan board that would draw district lines in our state. So determine what districts all of our representatives have to run in. It bans politicians and lobbyists from being on that board.
Right.
So politicians will no longer get to draw their own districts to make themselves win and stay in power, right? And lobbyists can't be a part of the process, which I think is a really important detail.
Yeah.
So it will be completely nonpartisan. What we have in the state of Ohio now is that the Republicans who are in office, that is the party that is in power in Ohio, they've drawn districts that further empower them. So the way you draw a district can stack the deck so that one party wins. Then that party continues to draw districts that stack the deck so that they win, so that they can pass things like this voter ID law that make it harder for anyone else to take power, but also keeps them from being as accountable to voters.
Right, because everyone who's in their district believes the same thing.
Exactly.
They're not
and it
gonna
also
fight
makes
against them.
primaries, single party primaries, where you choose who's going to run from your party. It makes primaries a bigger part of the process, so people are more extreme, right? So Republicans are trying to out-Republican each other, and Democrats are trying to out-Democrat each other, instead of the two parties running against each other in a general election and trying to appeal to the most voters.
Right.
So passing Issue One is a really critical piece to right-sizing how representation looks in our state.
Absolutely, because Ohio is one of the most gerrymandered states in the country.
Yep.
So hopefully if we are able to do that, if people show up to vote, we can start a groundswell, because we even have done that in the US around reproductive rights, right?
Yes.
Like this, I think that no one expected for Ohio to be able to do what it did, but I think it really helped people understand that like ballot initiatives are an amazing tool for the people to have their voices heard. And of course, people who are in politics already know like a ballot initiative and what it does, but I think that it really empowered people to understand that we can make a difference when we show up to the ballot box, and when we say, no, actually that's not what we wanted. And no, we're not gonna take it. So I think if we can do this as well with gerrymandering, we can really influence some of the other states that are also gerrymandered to hell. So
I completely agree. I think it is a huge opportunity, and it's real people went out, collected the signatures, real people, not politicians. Citizens, not politicians, collected those signatures.
Right.
They got it on the ballot, and now it's up to all of us real people to actually vote it through.
Right. Well, and citizens will then have a part in the process going forward because of the committee.
Yep.
And it won't be, as you said, lobbyists and politicians making all the decisions that affect the rest of us.
Yep.
What are some other things that you think are important on the ballot this year that folks should know about?
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of issues on the ballot, and so knowing what you're walking into the ballot box and you're going to see is really important. One critical piece for folks who live in Franklin County is the Link Us ballot initiative.
Right.
It's issue 47 here, and it is all about establishing better transportation infrastructure in our community. So a faster bus line that covers more area, makes more stops. Really important. More sidewalks, more multi-use paths. So it's kind of, when you look around and you think, I feel like I could get there better. Like you're stuck in traffic.
You can get there. You're like, you
can.
don't feel like it. You actually can get there.
Right.
There's a better way.
We have so many neighborhoods in Columbus where there are not sidewalks. And I think about, as a parent, you're a parent, pushing your baby around in the stroller. And I mean, in Berwick, there aren't sidewalks in many places.
And that's such a familial community and has been for generations.
Right. And so there's just pockets that sidewalks are pretty expensive to actually blanket the city with. And there were times in our history where it wasn't the law for developers to include sidewalks. Now it's the law.
Right.
But we still have a lot of our built environment resulting from those decades. So Link Us covers all kinds of transportation, truly walking from here to there and being safe doing it, as well as getting from here to there, maybe your job or some activity, and doing it faster.
Right.
So it's a really, really important one.
Well, and I think it helps prepare Columbus for the growth. The growth is inevitable, whether we're prepared or not remains to be seen.
Yes.
But it's going to be happening regardless. So how do we make it so that we're not all of the places that I go where the traffic is just, and then it's also better for the environment, not as many cars on the road. So
exactly, that's exactly right, and that's what we have. That's what we as voters have the potential to make happen. That's why voting is so powerful. It is the chance that we can say, my voice matters in this. So I think issue 1, issue 47 are the two most important issues on our local ballot.
Right. What about, do you want to talk about the Supreme Court?
And the Supreme
races
Court,
at all?
yes. So those are candidates versus issues.
Right.
But yeah, we have Supreme Court races, 3 Supreme Court races in the state. And it's really, really important to vote in those races. So you talked about issue 1 last year, the reproductive rights ballot initiative. So legislators who have been elected on gerrymandered districts and therefore don't represent us, right, passed the law in the first place that put us in the position to have to take our rights back at the ballot box.
Right.
Then after we did, they want to misinterpret that law, right, and restrict abortion rights anyway, right? They want to draw more gerrymandered districts that subvert the law the citizens tried to pass about a decade ago, and still pass gerrymandered districts. So there's all these ways that the legislature can kind of work at cross purposes with what the people have already said they want. And you know what the backstop to that is? The Supreme Court. Right? So the Ohio Supreme Court. Obviously the federal Supreme Court is by presidential and Senate appointment.
Yeah.
But the Ohio Supreme Court has a say in these issues. We need to have fair justices who are calling the shots as according to the Constitution, not according to what I think often is a misinterpretation by legislators in Ohio who gerrymandered themselves into safe districts.
Well, and then added party affiliations to the ballot for, let's be honest, a lot of people when they're going to the ballot, they don't necessarily have as much information as I have or you have. They may not be listening to a show like this, but they know that they identify as a Democrat or a Republican. But just because you're a Republican doesn't necessarily mean that that judge aligns with your belief system. You're actually not supposed to know.
Right? That's how it was designed originally.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I don't think that people talk enough about the disrespect of it all, meaning that, like, we have already said that we want abortion rights in Ohio. And instead of being like, okay, I respect that as a legislator, I respect the will of the people, it's like doing all of these things to try to subvert what people actually want. And that, to me, signals this like slide towards extremism in our state. And we definitely don't want to get to keep kicking the can down the road until we have these people, and we can't. And the Supreme Court would be a way where we would have people that it would be hard for a long time to rid ourselves of that.
Yeah, because they're interpreting the laws, and they need to have fidelity to that process instead of fidelity to a political party. Right.
And we're not even supposed to know, again, what somebody came on my show a couple weeks ago and was saying, like, Supreme Court judges are supposed to be judges, period, are supposed to be impartial, right? They're supposed to interpret the law. And when we have these party affiliations, then we get sort of a glimpse into what a person might think, and it just kind of convolutes the whole process.
Yeah, especially with gerrymandering, because I think if you have such strong fidelity to a party, right, your party got you elected. I mean, think about what these Republican justices were then being asked to do. A Republican legislature and a Republican governor sent them gerrymandered districts and basically said, like, is it party or is it people?
Yeah.
Justices, right? Is it party or is it people? And they want to side with party because that's what empowered them.
Right. And that's what keeps people in their seats, is if you side with the party. So I have another question for you. This is about voting. More of a, I don't want to say it's a philosophical question, maybe it is, but again, the people that you serve at YWCA are marginalized in many ways. And what I found as being a marginalized person, being a Black woman in this country, I've always been like pretty like gung-ho about voting. I've always been like, I'm gonna vote. Like, as soon as I was able to vote in my first election, like, I was there, I did it. But I also think that there's the other side of people who I understand who say, why would I vote when, look at where I am, and nothing for me has changed. In fact, maybe my life has gotten harder, or like, I showed up at the ballot box one time and I was excited about it, but then nothing changed for me. Like, I'm not doing it again. And I don't subscribe to this idea that shaming people into voting is the process by which we get people to vote. So given, and I understand y'all are a C3 organization, but given the work that you do you ever have those kinds of conversations with people, and how are you all tackling that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we try to hit the nail on the head there, where we understand the exact phenomenon. A lot of times people refer to it as voter apathy. I don't think it's apathy. Apathy implies somebody doesn't care. I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people don't show up exactly as you described because they aren't sure that it has ever helped them to do so.
It's like going back to a boyfriend who cheated on you. Like, you want me to keep going back? Like, no.
Right. So, yes. Do you know Latasha Brown, who founded Black Voters Matter?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she has a great quote on this where she talks about you're sort of asking folks to believe in a system that's never benefited them, like that system of democracy, asking them to show up. So we, as a 501c3 interested in voter turnout, right? We want people to vote. And we're nonpartisan, but we want people to vote.
Right.
We actually get that we get that complexity. And I think we have to appeal to people with their sense of hope, right? Like, what's possible if we can actually rally communities and change the rules of the game. So if we can ensure that fair districts are in place in our state, imagine how much more powerful our single vote is. The outcome isn't decided before us when we go into the ballot box by gerrymandered districts. Our vote gets to lead to someone being elected or not. So fair districts, I think, are first and foremost in helping to combat some of that hopelessness people might have.
Yeah.
I do think a lot about that Dr. King quote about the arc of the moral universe. When that arc that bends toward justice, it doesn't do it on its own.
No.
Right? Like, we're all there.
We
pushing.
we have to continue to push for that. And right now it just can feel so, I think we're in a culture right now, and kind of like a cultural moment where things feel so, I don't even like the word divided, because I do think that there's like division for a reason. I think that there has been such extreme changes in our government and actions by our government that people do feel like, I am squarely on this side and I am against that, or the other side feels they're squarely against what, the other side is doing. But I have just seen, we're just in this moment where it feels so heavy to be involved in any of this. And I was talking to you before we got on camera about the political commercials that have been coming on in Ohio in the Senate race with your dad. And I'm like, they're eating him up on those commercials. Like, some of it I'm like, whoa, like, that is, being a person who's been in Ohio my entire life and seen those commercials, I've had to like cut off YouTube. I've had to cut off a lot of things because I just can't believe. That's the granddad. They're like, okay.
They're like, don't mess with grandpa.
Right, exactly. They're like personally offended, which I would be too. But I do want to give you a chance because they've been going so hard on your dad. Like, here's your chance.
I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So, I'm so proud of my dad, and I really think Ohio is lucky to have him as a senator. I mean, he works so hard for people, for everyday folks. Like, I mean, he's always thinking about people over Wall Street, people over corporations. He's stood up to these multinational free trade deals that have often like shipped a lot of the jobs our economy used to rely on overseas. I mean, he's been there doing the thing. And I'm really, really proud of him. The commercials this year, I have a take for you.
Sure.
I really think we're at the point, these right-wing super PACs that are spending money against my dad. I mean, first of all, in just 1 week in September, they spent $26 million in 1 week against
I can tell they're spending money because...
his opponent in that same time spent $200,000. Like, his opponent is these super PACs. It's these out-of-state, Wall Street, billionaire-funded super PACs coming in. His opponent doesn't really have to lift his finger. He gets out there and he talks about how women over 50 shouldn't care about abortion because they can't have babies. Okay, so Mr. Marino, why do you care about abortion? You can't have a baby, right? Like, the hypocrisy of it. No, but my take on these commercials, to be honest, it's these out-of-state super PACs. And I think at a certain point, what they're saying is dangerous. And I think it's close to violence. The way you talk about trans kids, about immigrants, this is exploiting people's internal anxieties that folks have because we're human. We all have anxieties about our, station in life, how we feel, how secure we might feel. And these out-of-state super PACs are exploiting folks' anxieties and scapegoating people who don't have power and don't have voice. And the reason I say that I think this equates to really state violence is that imagine the impact. None of us like seeing those commercials. Imagine the impact that has on a trans child.
I'm glad that you brought that up.
Suicide rates go up. Truly harm or death from bullying goes up. This is serious stuff, and these people don't care.
No.
What they are willing to, they're saying it about my dad, but they're really talking about real people. And I think it's...
And it has real world consequences for people. And I'm glad that you brought up trans people, because like this isn't a commercial that is targeted towards your dad, but the they them commercial
Yeah.
from the Trump campaign. I'm
Yeah.
like, they understand how unsafe trans people are made
Yes.
to be, not just in this country, but all over the world. And to do that just is cruel.
Yep.
And it is state violence. And they need to be held accountable
Yeah.
for, I would love, after all this, to look at the data of what's going to happen going forward to trans people. And it just makes them even more unsafe in a world where they're already incredibly unsafe.
And you know, they've done this before. This is their playbook. Like, this is the right-wing playbook. Can I tell you a quick story about my dad?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so as a kid, I was probably, I don't know, I was 10 or 11, mid-90s. We were in church, and we were just attending service, my sister and my dad and I. We had to leave a little bit early to go to, I think, a campaign event, because he was on the ballot that year. And we were stopped. We were followed out by another member of the congregation who stopped us and just wanted to talk to my dad. This happened a lot, right? So I didn't think anything of it. But he looked at my dad and he said, "Thank you. Thank you for your vote." And I, as a 10 or 11-year-old, could tell there was something different about this thank you. So I asked my dad about it, and he said, "I took a really tough vote. Not very many people in Congress took that vote. And this man, it personally affected his life. He was really grateful for it." And my dad explained to me at that time, mid-90s, what gay marriage was and what people around the country were saying about LGBTQ folks. So fast forward, and I come to realize this vote he took was only about 60-ish members of the entire Congress that has 465 members had the courage to stand up and vote against the Defense of Marriage Act. My dad was one of them. The Defense of Marriage Act was, like a Karl Rove, George Bush ploy to try to beat members of Congress in tough congressional districts over an issue that divided people, but that also deployed hatred against a group.
As a tactic.
Yep, as a tactic.
Yeah.
And first of all, they tried to beat my dad with that, and they didn't. And that's what's going to happen again if you fast forward all these years later. And they're trying to beat him with an issue that they know divides people and that harms people at the same time. Scapegoats a group of people, tries to other them, knowing that it's very hard for them to use their voice in the current political environment. It's the same stuff.
Yeah.
And I feel lucky I've been able to see my dad over all these years stand up. These commercials are vile. They're, one of them cites a vote my dad took on after the COVID-19 pandemic. There was a Republican senator who a bunch of aid needed to go to public schools, right? Because of everything that was happening during COVID with getting kids back up to speed after all the learning from home, right?
Right.
And a Republican senator tried to attach an amendment that schools could only get this money if they banned transgender, something having to do with transgender students, right? So, and my dad voted against that because why should we force schools to do something when Congress has no idea what schools are grappling with? They need this funding to get kids back up to speed after quarantine and learning from home and all these things. So you think about the way that they distort the record of folks who are just trying to do right by their communities.
Yeah, yeah. But I also think that, you mentioned your dad all the way back to the 90s. He's got a track record
standing for what's
at
right
this point, and it's out there. And I just hope that people in politics understand that none of us I don't like seeing it at all. I don't like to see just the cruelty, period. And I hope that Bernie Moreno's campaign understands that no matter what people believe in general, people don't want to see this. This is too much. It's
No,
too much,
this
you
is
know?
not what we want our government doing.
No, we don't want all of this stuff. We don't want it. We would like to return to sender.
Yes.
So
Yes.
but
Return to sender.
yeah, but I also wanted to make another connection about gerrymandering because I wanted to talk to you. I had a whole session and episodes on the school board and the school closures. And I saw that you came out against the school closures for Columbus City Schools because your kids are students within the district. And I was really happy to see that because, I mean, you do have an outsized voice. And it's good to see people stand up, especially when they think what I think. And want the same things that I want. So I was happy to see that. And I want the last thing for you to do is to make the connection between like what happens within like our schools and like voting, why it's important to vote yes on issue one. Because it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No, our schools are so connected to our vote. Actually, I want to say 1992, the Ohio Supreme Court at that time actually ruled that our funding formula for public schools was unconstitutional. And we have never addressed it. Ted Strickland tried to address it when he was in office, and then John Kasich rolled back a lot of his efforts. We have never addressed this unconstitutional school funding formula. What does that mean for the formula to be unconstitutional? It simply means that the way we fund schools isn't fair to every community. Largely, this in school districts that don't have wealthy folks or upper middle income folks who are the majority of students, they really get the short end of the stick when it comes to funding by the state. The state has never addressed this because that's not where they get their power. They don't get their power from people who send their kids to public schools, right? They get their power from their party. From this gerrymandered system that has allowed, party to rule and lobbyists to rule. And I think we have an opportunity as, again, like everyday folks across the state to make sure that the legislature is reflective of our values and our choices in everyday life. I think our public schools are so important. I've also, the state has diverted hundreds of millions of dollars away from public schools through vouchers to religious schools, and I think that that's really problematic. So we have to be able to, again, hold our legislators accountable. I think in the case of I'm so glad that you covered the Columbus City schools and the potential for closures and all of that. And I honestly, I'm going to say, I think we have to stay on it. Right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah?
Me included.
Exactly. All of us.
Because I'm tired. I'm going to be honest with you. As a mom who lives in the city of Columbus and who deeply believes in public education and wants to keep my daughter in public education, it is tiring to see what's happening at the top and know that, like, my daughter's going to be okay. Because she has two parents who are able to stay on top of it. We have a level of privilege to be able to do that. But there are so many families who are not as privileged as us, whose kids have the potential to not be okay. And to see like the mess, because it's messy, happening at the top, it's very distressing.
Okay, now you're making me emotional. Because that's exactly, you articulated exactly how I feel. That I know my kiddos are going to be okay. And frankly, their school was on the closure list. I mean, I knew they would have been okay if their school closed and we had to have some upheaval and move them elsewhere, and we would have lost all the connective tissue of their school and all the amazing things going. But it wasn't about them. There were a couple dozen schools that I think the district didn't take the time to understand. And I knew the data was being misinterpreted at my child's school. And I knew that they didn't really know it was because nobody had stopped to take a look. The task force hadn't shown up in the schools. School board hadn't shown up in the schools. And I felt like they were missing And if that was happening at my child's school, I knew it was happening at the others.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where, parents started working together. And I do understand that I can garner some attention if I stand up and say something about it. And I think that, to be honest, I was like nervous. Do I do this? Do I not? Because then that attracts a certain kind of attention.
Yeah.
But it was...
And it attracts a certain kind of attention to your kids, and you just want them to be able to, like, be kids going to school. But, like, I appreciate you doing that because, and recognizing there is a sacrifice there because, like, our kids don't ask us to be whoever we are, like, in this world. And so doing that to me meant a lot because I think that we both recognize that the privilege that we have for whatever reason, and that there are so many kids within CCS that are going to be harmed by this inability to make decisions, this like inability to utilize like community voice and understand like when it matters, right? Like don't do it after the fact.
Yeah.
This type of stuff you have to do.
Front.
Yeah, you have to do it from the jump.
Yep.
Otherwise it's not going to work in the ways that it should. And so, yeah.
And
I'm going to do my best to stay on top of it.
Because this would never happen that way in a suburban school.
No.
They would never skip over the parents and students. Like
no.
that the task force barely had parent representation.
Right.
And obviously not student representation. And that it would just never happen that way. And so I will tell you the one thing I don't have any doubt about is when my kids come home at the end of the day, they're going to Columbus City Schools for a reason. Like I feel lucky for their teachers. I feel lucky for the care of their buildings and their principals. I know that my kiddos have a safe landing place in our home, but they also are learning and growing in public schools.
It's possible.
It's so possible. And we have to be stewards of that. All of us.
And we have to stay on top of it. So that's what I'm trying to do here. But yeah, so is there anything else that you want people to know, whether it's about like the upcoming election or YWCA, how they can get involved, anything, or where people can find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely.
I always do that last.
Yes. So first of all, get out and vote. Like it's so important. Get out and vote. Check your polling location. Go vote early. Laws recently have made it harder to do that, but you can vote early. You can vote early from now until 2 days before Election Day. So the Board of Elections is up off Morse Road. You can do it in person. You can request your absentee ballot from the Secretary of State and make sure your vote is banked before Election Day. Don't got to worry about lines. Bank your vote.
And if you're voting absentee ballot, go ahead and get those in.
Yep.
Like soon.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Don't wait till the due date.
That's right.
Do it before, because we know sometimes the mail can be a little, depending on what's going on, it can be a little wonky.
Yep.
So.
If you vote by mail, you don't have to send a copy of your ID in, right? You just sign that that's your address and do it now. And so vote. That's my biggest message. But then other than that, I would love to say YWCA Columbus, we do housing work. So we work with formerly homeless people, currently unhoused people. We do childcare work. We operate 23 childcare locations across the community. And then we do leadership, development, racial equity, and advocacy work. We always need people's help. So please go to ywcacolumbus.org. There is a tab there where you can find out all the different ways you can donate, volunteer, lend your voice, show up at an event. We'd love to see you. We'd love to meet you. And we'd really love to be in this fight with you.
Absolutely. Now, where can people find you on
Yes.
social media
Yes.
if you want them to find you.
Absolutely. Yes, please find me.
Sometimes I don't want people to find my social media.
No, please feel free to find me. The easiest place, I do have Twitter and Facebook, but the easiest place is Instagram. I have not yet mastered the TikTok, so don't find me there.
I'm on it. I'm not where I need to be yet, but I actually do like, as a millennial, I do like TikTok better than Instagram. Because you can find, like, their search function is really good. So you can find, like, your recipes. I can find my workouts.
And it's funny.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good content.
There's a lot of good content. And there's, like, just a lot of, like, unscripted moments on TikTok that I like watching. So
but
if
I am
you're
not a
on
producer
board,
of good content on TikTok, so
Right.
don't bother looking for me. I think I have, like, one single post from the depths of quarantine with my 4-year-old.
I have like 3.
It's like
we need to get on that too.
Okay.
Because I think we're missing out.
All right, our to-do list after this is, get
School
on
board,
TikTok and school board. Yeah.
Totally go together.
But my Instagram is Liz Clark Brown.
Okay.
So yeah, you can find me there. And if you DM me, I do respond to stuff.
All right.
So if people have questions or need resources, please feel free.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Liz.
Thank you for having me. This was
Of course.
awesome.